Hello, I'm Juliana Miller, Associate Director of Industrial Design at SMART, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to our first SMART Salon of the year. Tonight's discussion is on the subject of coffee and how to design and improve upon the daily rituals in our everyday lives. I'm joined this evening by three coffee experts and my co-host Charlie Paradise, our Director of Engineering. The idea of this salon really came straight from the projects that we were working on and the conversations that we were having about how important that moment of respite or social connection that coffee really provides can be in our daily lives, especially nowadays. So which had us really asking how design could elevate these everyday moments and make them even better. Our three guests today represent different coffee experiences and perspectives from home to cafe. I'd love it if they could each introduce themselves now and talk a little bit about some projects that they're working on.
Hi, my name is Liz Grazing, and today I'm here representing OXO. I'm the Global Category Director there for coffee and tea. I've been at OXO since 2009, but I took a 6-year sabbatical to live and work in the Netherlands, and I came back in July of 2019, around the same time that we were launching this 8-cup coffee maker. Through the development of this coffee maker, we realized that there were a lot of user insights around people brewing just the right amount of coffee for their morning, which is why it has a single serve feature, and also the flexibility to brew into a carafe. And while we see this resonating with consumers, we also want to build upon it and continue to grow. I think one of the best things about being a category director at OXO is that we get to help people in their daily lives achieve a greater level of satisfaction in whatever they're doing. And we do that by like the OXO Better Guarantee, but we're also looking for a better brew. And that's sort of the motivation that I have continuing to work here.
All right, I'm Clay Hoffman. I'm a senior manager on product at Starbucks, which essentially is a fancy way of saying that I help us kind of come up with a pipeline of beverages that we will create and launch over the next couple of years. It's from here until 24 months from now, essentially. And I'm really excited to talk about this topic. I think at Starbucks, we've seen the ritual change quite a bit, especially now in the face of COVID. We've seen the switch from our customers coming in the morning for their kind of like daily recharge coffee to they're now coming to us more often in the afternoon for a reward or an escape from their day. And so we see customers going from kind of neutral or unflavored coffees into things that have a little bit more intrigue, things that are a little bit sweeter, a little bit more flavored. And it's all kind of wrapped up in this idea of we need a chance to escape. We need a chance to reward ourselves. And this is kind of the role that Starbucks plays in creating those rituals for folks.
Hi, I'm Stephan von Neumann. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Steady. And about 6-7 years ago, we launched a commercial piece of coffee equipment that you see here in the picture. And it brings the pour over coffee experience to busy retail coffee shops. And when we started, I kind of recognized that pour over, which is a very specific way of making a single cup of brewed coffee, kind of controlling all the different elements that go into that, was having a hard time translating into busy coffee shops. So we sort of semi-automated that experience, but really trying to respect all of the rituals and habits and the way that people were doing that at home and bringing it to a coffee shop that works for everybody. So I guess what I'm going to be talking about today.
Great, thank you everyone. A little housekeeping. For everyone attending, there is a question and answer box at the bottom of your screens. Please do ask any questions that you may have as we're talking there. Charlie will be keeping tabs on them and we will submit them to the panelists towards the end of the salon. There is also a chat window for your comments and thoughts and any links that we might be sharing throughout the discussion. The session is being recorded and a summary along with all links will be available in a week or so on the Smart Design website. So with that, let's just go ahead and get started and really talk about first and foremost, what is a ritual? I mean, coffee is something that people drink every day. What makes it a ritual instead of a habit or routine? Stefan, do you want to get us started?
Sure. Yeah, so, coffee is something that I think half the adult world drinks every day. And, while it is kind of a global experience, there are as many approaches to it as there are, markets for companies, but like baristas and coffee shops and individuals drinking it. And so, what we set about trying to do with the Pour Steady is kind of honor those rituals and the theater, but also the art and the science of coffee, and bring it to a place where we're not we're considering like the customer and the barista and all the way down to the technicians and the roaster, making sure that the energy they put into bringing the best cup of coffee, the best beans, the best cup of coffee to their cup are honored throughout. So that was kind of our starting point for our design, and where we kind of keep coming back to is making sure that we're designing that for everybody and respecting where they're coming from in the global coffee experience.
That's great. Thank you. Clay, how about you?
Yeah, I think there's something to a ritual, and that there's some positive emotion to it. I think about other terms you might use, like routine, habit. Ritual, I think, is separated from those two, and because there's more to it than just being a daily occurrence, but it's like a daily occurrence that you really enjoy. It's like something you want to do, and so you kind of go back to it when maybe you're looking for a little bit of structure in your day or a little bit of order to get out of some chaos. And I think that's definitely why we've seen some rituals change at Starbucks in the last couple of years. But there's just so much positivity tied up in this idea of a ritual, that it's something that's a tool for people to kind of get through their day, or just keep going, or just like I said before, kind of escape to a moment where they feel at peace.
Great. And Liz, finally, how do you think about coffee as a ritual?
Yeah, I think it's really echoing what Clay just mentioned. For me, ritual is really about being mindful about what you're doing in a way that a habit is really not. You do a habit sort of without thinking. But when you make coffee as a ritual, you're paying attention to the beans that you're grinding. What does it look like? Is it the right grind size? How much do you put in? How much did you put in the last time? And you're like really involved and centered in this process of making coffee, and then also enjoying it. I think it's one of the reasons why whenever you look at any sort of like coffee marketing material, there's always like a picture of somebody with their mouth on the cup, because they're trying to get you to be in that moment of when you desire that sip of coffee and you get to drink it. And I think that's also, part of the joy of making coffee. And the only thing that I add for our products, what we make is we're sort of letting people seek that ideal and play around with where they're headed. And I think that side of sort of the guideline is really helpful when people are going into this coffee journey and they're going to try something new and experiment.
Mm-hmm. I love the visual that you painted. It's so true. It's like
in there,
I want a cup of coffee right now for that. Clay, I'd love if you could, talk a little bit more about how you see Starbucks as a ritual or an escape, and how that really has influenced the beverages that you create. You mentioned that they're changing a lot, and people are coming in at different times a day.
Yeah, I think it doesn't start or end with just the beverage. There's so much more to it. It's before anyone goes and starts their journey to a Starbucks. Like, I think kind of the best example that comes to mind is at Starbucks pretty much every day at around 3:30, you're going to see a group of high school kids. Like, they got out of school and they go straight to that Starbucks, and because it's their chance of like, they've accomplished something, like they've finished their day, so they're ready to go and like drink a refresher or a frappuccino, something along those lines, like whatever it is that they're in the mood for that day. But it's their escape, it's their moment of joy. It's like they're taking what was either could have been a rough day at school, or it could have been a great day, and they're celebrating. But that part or that mindset they were in started them on this journey to go to Starbucks and get some beverage. But it doesn't end there either. Like we're designing beverages that are meant to like tap into emotion to make you feel happy. But there's more to it afterwards too. So think about posting the image of the experience that you had on Instagram, right? Or something along the lines of like, this is my perfect order that I made just for me. And then, they created that beverage for me in the store. So it's tied to so much more than just the beverage. It's about the entire experience around it. And I think that's where part of the ritual comes into play here.
Interesting. Liz, I'd love if you could talk a little bit about how OXO really uses kind of its rich history of human-centered design, but that's more commonly associated with like ergonomics or usability. And how does the same process consider the emotions of the user?
Yeah, so it's a really good point, but I think I'd answer it with respect to cleaning, which, a lot of people don't really like to clean. But we offer a lot of cleaning products at OXO, and they're really focused about getting you to the result faster, because people do really enjoy having a clean house and having an organized life. And so it's not necessarily about, in that case, it's not focused on the journey in the same way that we're focused on coffee. We're more focused on the end result. When we look at the coffee making tools that we have, it's just about making it just hard enough in that journey so that there's a lot of satisfaction with that end result. So that's where we're sort of focusing. A lot of it does have to do with the functionality and giving people the tools that they need exactly when they need them. Like if you talk about another product that we make is a pour over with water tank. So if you're new to pour over, you might not be able to time your pours or weigh your brew, or you might not even have a pour over kettle. In this case, you can just pour the water into the water tank and it will take care of distributing that water evenly over the grounds and make you sort of like your first pour over. We say like pour over with training wheels. But eventually you might want to try something different. Maybe it's your 3 o'clock coffee. Maybe it's decaf. I don't know what your preferences are, but when you come to it again, you might say, well, I have 30 minutes. I just want to be in the moment and make this pour over. And then you have the chance to do that. And it's all within the same product and you get a good result each time. And that's where we're trying to really to separate our products from that competition, to really focus on meeting people in their journey where they are at that time.
Mm-hmm. But so kind of making sure that the end result is always what they want, it makes the ritual worthwhile. Is that kind of how you're approaching it?
Yeah, I mean, it's also about like, we talk about the IKEA effect. So people overvalue the furniture that they assemble as opposed to like something that they would just buy. And it's about making that process just hard enough so that you feel even greater satisfaction with the end result. Like, I don't know, the best beer that I've ever drank was a Blue Moon, which is not a very good beer, but it was because I had hiked for like 6 hours in the snow. And, because the journey to that beer was so much more difficult, it felt so much more satisfying. And I think it's about balancing, your trip to the end result. Like cleaning, you just want to get there. And sometimes you just want to get that coffee, and sometimes you want to take the time to savor your journey.
Stephan, I loved it at the start when you really said that, part of the thinking behind Pour Steady was really thinking about how to actually honor the ritual of a pour over coffee. How did that influence the design of Pour Steady?
Well, we really tried to make it so that it would, pour over. It's something that an individual with like doing it with all the right way. They're using a kettle, they're using scales, they're using a thermometer, and they're using a timer. And like doing that for yourself, where you can kind of control, the experience from start to finish, didn't translate very well into retail coffee shops. So we wanted to kind of honor the artistry and the science of that, but do it in a way that worked as well as an espresso machine, so that the person in line, they might know what a pour over is, and they might expect, their favorite barista to make that perfect cup for them. And they'd be willing to wait for that, but they're seldom willing to wait for the person in front of them. And the barista, may make pour over at home, but at the counter serving the customers, trying to keep track of all of those variables, like became a service issue and a concentration issue where the repeatability and the communication, kind of could fall apart. So for them, it makes that whole complicated chain work as well as espresso. And for the grower and the roaster, we're getting those perfect beans, to the customer in just the right way is a long journey that takes a growing season and international transportation and roasting it and then grinding it right beforehand. Like all that is kind of part of the ritual that the individual would, finding that coffee and getting that story and grinding it. All of that goes into it. But for them, serving the best coffee in an imperfect way hurts their brand. It hurts, doesn't honor, the energy that they put into it. So, when we looked at the problem, we tried to make sure that we were solving for everybody in there to make sure that the theater and the science and all of it that goes into it makes it into the cup, at the counter for the coffee shop.
Interesting. Yeah, I loved when we spoke before about how you spoke about, I think the way that the baristas really spend the time, or the baristas necessarily, but the roasters, the coffee shops spend so much time really selecting the right bean, getting the right roast, getting that perfect product. And the idea that Pour Steady is just designed to kind of not get in the way of that perfect cup of coffee every single time.
Yeah. I mean, we try to make the value and the care that people put into bringing that there apparent at the opportunity right before the coffee is served. Like, admittedly, a batch brew dialed in the right way can make a perfect cup of coffee, but the customer doesn't know if it's been sitting there for 10 minutes or 2 hours. And to kind of, when you're dealing with smell and taste, like how things are presented have an influence on how they are experienced. And with our product, we've got a light on it and the nozzle moves and the light is in such a place where you can see the shadow and you can see the steam coming off of the grounds as they're being made. Well, that may not, you can do that in the dark, but like having both the barista and the customer see that together, kind of honors all of it that brought that there to them, or tries to anyway.
Awesome. That's really great. Sorry, I got lost as I muted as a classic New York ambulance went by. So the other thing that we've talked about a lot is how that the theatrics of the cafe, how the theatrics of the cafe really influence the design of Pour Steady. Could you speak a little bit more about that?
Well, we're semi-automating the process, and the process, traditionally is small wares and a kettle. It's sort of the oldest, most simple way of making a cup of coffee. And the theater that, these competition baristas and coffee professionals bring to it, or even like the home enthusiast, is around keeping track of all of that and staying organized and being consistent so that like all the variables are there, but you can, if you've ever watched a barista competition, it's their ability to do all the technical stuff and educate and talk about it and, be able to, it's a performance in the best possible way. And in translating that to what is essentially under the hood, a piece of industrial automation, we had to be very mindful of the fact that this is the culture, this is the ritual that we're stepping into with a machine, and we didn't want to automate the wrong part, and we didn't want to mess that up and make it so that it looks like the robots are coming for not just the job, but also whatever. We just wanted to make sure that like we were replacing some of that theater and some of that performance with something that our equipment could uniquely do, and make that communicated to all the stakeholders.
Okay. Clay, I'd love to, if you could tell us a little bit about how the experience at Starbucks has really changed as people have been spending less and less time in Starbucks itself and maybe moving more to drive-through or mobile orders.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely something we've seen happen lately, and that there are fewer people who are just staying in the cafe and drinking coffee and getting, refills or another beverage in the cafe. And so what we've kind of seen is that where the theatrics kind of used to be in the stores themselves, it's more the customers are creating those theatrics now. They're like, it's more important how the beverage looks to them and how it presents on, like, let's say their Instagram or TikTok feed. That's almost the more important piece of it for a lot of them than the beverage itself. And so they've taken control over everything essentially. Like, we've unlocked how they can personalize amounts of syrup, amounts of fruit, amounts of types of espresso. All of those things they can have complete ownership over. And they're even doing things that are a little bit further than what we have tried to unlock for them, where they're maybe adding things like matcha to a cold foam on top of a cold brew, so that it's got a bright green layer on top of this like deep dark cold brew and looks great. Who knows how it tastes? Maybe it's great, maybe it's not, but they've kind of taken control of how they want their beverage to show up for them and how they want to use them to represent themselves.
Interesting. Yeah, it makes me feel like I need to get on Instagram and start stalking some absolutely crazy refresher products to see what people are doing.
I mean, it's funny you say that, because there's been some trends in the past where you literally cannot create them in a Starbucks, and yet they'll tell you, like, go to Starbucks, get this drink. Cotton candy refresher comes to mind from TikTok. Can't actually make that Starbucks store. Someone faked it at home and then posted it and acted like it came from us. So they've definitely taken over some of the visuals for sure.
Oh, wow. Just a reminder to everybody, we will get to audience questions. So if you do want to go to the question and answer box, and please put in any questions that you are thinking. And we'd love to share them with the panelists. So Liz, I'd love for you to kind of talk about how, maybe moving back into the home space in this conversation, to think about how you really design one machine for all experience levels and coffee preferences.
Yeah, I think that's where the work that we do internally and also the work that we do with smart design really comes into play, because we do an enormous amount of user testing and testing different beans, different grind sizes. And we try to make it so easy for you to make your cup of coffee. So we try to lower the threshold to enter this coffee space if you're new. So if you don't really care about coffee, you just dump coffee in there and you brew it and you drink it, and you're not really interested in that process, we'll still brew a good cup of coffee for you. But if you're looking to increase your understanding of coffee, try different beans, try different grind sizes, that's where we're, offering products for that entire process. You can go from whole bean, grind it with that. We have a grinder that works really well, and dial in exactly what you need for whatever process you're doing. It's not just about drip coffee. It could also be French press or pour over, and really like noticing what you're doing. I think 90% of the time in the morning I just want to get to that cup of coffee, but I do have that extra bit of time and I get those special beans. I want to look at it. I want to see, okay, now I'm switching beans. What does the grind size look like? What should it really be? If I was really on my game, maybe I would try to do a cupping to really understand what's going on with that coffee. But even just the act of playing around with it is passion and fun, and it's all also part of the ritual. It's not necessarily with an end in mind. It's more really, in that case, about the journey and finding out which parameters are going to affect coffee, and understanding, the next time I brew it, I'm going to try it with a different ratio, or, and at OXO, what we try to do is offer all those tools. We're craft coffee for everybody. So we don't want to be scary. You shouldn't be afraid of doing coffee math. If you just want to be a scooper, and scoop coffee into your drip coffee maker, that's fine. And we'll brew a nice cup of coffee for you. But when you're ready to try something different, we also have those tools. And that's really the goal.
Yeah, I might
really-
be,
Oh,
sorry.
sorry, go ahead. No.
I just wanted to jump in, like, during this COVID era, we've seen a lot of folks, dig into specialty coffee as a hobby. And I know from looking at the market that like a lot of commercial espresso machine manufacturers have seen an uptick in their smallest machines for home use. And I'm hoping that like during this time, a lot of people's rituals change from sort of the simpler entry level stuff you were talking about, Liz, to a more better informed, coffee nerd, as we call them here with love. And I would love for us to be making the products that when they come back to the world, that their new elevated, tastes can be met where they are in the coffee shops they're going to. And I think that's where, we could sort of see our audience grow. Like as coffee education at home grows, I think, the experience in the Starbuckses and the specialty coffee shops all over can be elevated as well.
Yeah, I
I
think
love-
I think once you have a bad cup of coffee, or once you have a good cup of coffee, you never want to have a bad cup of coffee again. So the hope is that all of these trends will just continue.
Yeah, so sorry, I just couldn't help myself because I think we spent a lot of time early on talking about how we felt that in some ways the cafe used to be the trendsetter and people would get a coffee in a shop or in a cafe and then they may go home and try to like recreate it themselves. And I love that we're saying now it might be actually moving the other way, and people like coming to shops looking for new experiences because of what they have been able to do by themselves and at home. I mean, Liz, I'd love if there was anything, just as you talked about, like all the different tools and equipment that OXO has for people. I was just curious if there was any, one of the products in the family that you think is more aligned to ritual or that you find that people are more passionate about.
I mean, I think the pour over is really the key to that ritual. It's sort of coffee in its simplest sense. And I think that's where people are sort of taking their first foray into crafts coffee. It's pretty cheap, or I should say inexpensive, to enter that space. And you can do really, really a lot with it. And you can really understand a lot about coffee. Like a good analogy is when you're trying to learn to do addition, you don't get a calculator. They make you do it by hand. And I think that's why, a lot of times, especially for these rituals, we're taking it back to its essence, like focusing on the really simple parts and getting the simple parts right in order for you to really experience coffee as it should be. Drip coffee, I love drip coffee makers. I use it every morning, but it's something that I do without thinking. So it's more on the level of a habit. If I'm going to make a pour over, I need to think about it. I need to look at it. I need to time it. And that sort of extra time in my journey is what's going to make me enjoy that coffee more and really like, okay, what am I drinking? Because I mean, there's also a whole thing of mindful eating, right? So we can also mindfully drink coffee and really be present in that moment, especially in a time when it's very difficult to stay focused because we're so into all of our Zoom and working from home and things like that. So it's nice to be real for a moment.
Great, love it. Clay, maybe I'd love if you could talk a little bit about how the personalization, you kind of touched on this before, about how personalizing your drink has really changed in the Starbucks experience. It's kind of always been there, but it feels like it's kind of at a next level now.
Yeah, it's always been part of our DNA to be able to create a beverage that is exactly what you want it to be. I think in the past, maybe the barista themselves was a little bit more involved in that. Like you kind of had to go into a Starbucks and had to have some guidance from whoever it was that was making your drink to know what might actually taste good. But now I think we've been able to kind of unlock some experimentation for folks so that they can go into the app and they can understand like, well, here are all the options that are available to them. And they just find some simple ways, whether that's like through TikTok or other friends or whoever it is, to change the beverage just a little bit at first. Usually is how we see it happen. Like maybe they'll add, an extra scoop of dragon fruit to a refresher or something instead of strawberries. And then they can kind of learn and grow over time. And that's kind of what we see happen. Like it takes time. Like they have to try some things, but there's enough ways in that are kind of low risk that it helps them learn and change on their own, and kind of on their own schedule, like as they want to. And they just want like the daily coffee, that's great. Like we can be there for them for that. I think customization and personalizing is kind of what makes Starbucks so unique.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I'm thinking about how Liz was talking about, the coffee experience at home being kind of about, being able to grow and learn. And yet you're talking about the Starbucks customer also, kind of looking to evolve and grow. And I'm curious if there's, what is maybe the thinking behind that, or how is it that they're trying to change?
I think, when what we tend to see is that people come in and they start drinking Starbucks with certain beverage. I'll just kind of go through my story. Like I came to Starbucks drinking pumpkin spice latte. Like that's what I was introduced to Starbucks as. Like that was the Starbucks drink for me, right? But people change over time. We can kind of see this in what they're buying, and that maybe they started there and they start to like slowly reduce the amount of flavor that they're having in their coffee. Or it could be that all of a sudden we see that someone's coming in and buying like a kid's milk. Well, they've probably changed their habits because they've got a family now. And so all of this is kind of like, as people evolve and change and purchase different things at Starbucks, we hope to have something that answers all of their problems, something that can be there for whatever occasion they're in. And so it's a journey. Like it's definitely a journey. I'd say generally what we see is that people kind of shift away from kind of the basic menu into things that are more personalized for them.
That's awesome. Great. I also thank you for legitimizing entering coffee via sugary lattes, and no shade or nothing to do with that. Stephan, I'm really curious. I think we talked a lot about handcrafted and the steps and the process. And I think you entered in such a different way of kind of automation and advanced technology, and kind of moving into this crafts space. How does that kind of still take a back seat to the ritual?
I mean, as a designer, working on this, we just always try to be very careful and mindful of not automating the wrong part, and not, we were sincere about making a tool for coffee professionals to solve for a specific need, and there's always a temptation when you start to add automation to something, if you're coming from an engineering perspective or just a common sense perspective. Almost, if you think about robots, you want them to like grind the coffee and weigh the coffee and do it for you, and like it suddenly becomes kind of like a robot doing this for you. And we knew that from the very beginning that was divisive. Ultimately, like people didn't necessarily want all of that to happen and the show to be about the robot. It really needed to meet the specialty coffee world where it is, which is a good place, and to and in addition to that, like you could automate the cleaning of a system, but like that's not really the point. So we really tried to make sure that we were pouring the water over the coffee and kind of capturing that moment in a way, and not trying to, also the original team sort of comes from an aerospace engineering background, honestly, where adding functionality and adding actuators and all of that adds, measurable risk. So the point was to like pay attention to what we could do and what we could do well, and make sure it works 100% of the time, and not try to try to fix everything for everybody and end up with something that wasn't quite as reliable and had, I don't know, ended up like kind of picking the wrong problem. So I don't know if that answers your question exactly, but that was sort of our approach from the beginning.
I love it. I mean, I think it's something that each of us have talked about a little bit, which is kind of the importance of whatever we design or bring in to really just be just enough for every single person to kind of take or do whatever it is that they want to do with it, whether that's just to get their cup of coffee, or it's to pull out 5 different pieces of equipment or 5 different steps, so that they have 15 minutes that they just go through the steps and it's entirely their moment. And to see that from someone making their own drink, like Clay was talking about, for better or worse, to the care that went into thinking about the pour steady. I think that's a really interesting tie-in across everybody. Maybe this is a really great time to go to some of our questions from the audience. And just a reminder, if anybody else does have any, you can still put them in the chat and we'll answer them or try to get to them.
Cool. Thanks very much. I can see my lighting's totally thrown off here, so excuse me for this weird bright face. So I think the first question really is to Clay. It's from Brendan. The question is, sustainability is a big issue when it comes to coffee on the go. How are Starbucks and other people and others thinking about the pandemic as an opportunity to change people's habits, behaviors, and rituals so they may be more environmentally friendly? And I think I'll start with Clay and then open to everybody.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the most apparent piece of that is the cups, right? Like if you're going to a Starbucks, you're gonna get it in a to-go cup most of the time. And the pandemic has honestly not helped us in that respect, because it's really hard for customers to go in and use a reusable cup, especially if they're going through, like, let's say, drive-through, or even if they're ordering through the app. It's tough for them to get a reusable cup and use that for their order. But I would say we've made all the right commitments to reduce waste. And at this point, it's a lot of experimentation. And that's kind of behind the bar, I would say, for things like brewing techniques, so that we're not, having to waste coffee, whether that's as part of the brewing or just maybe it's been held for too long and we didn't go through it. So there's a lot of equipment solves that we're working on behind the bar, but also in front. Like we rolled out this pilot here in Seattle, I think it was last fall, where you could kind of ask to borrow a cup, basically. So you go in, you say, I want to get my Starbucks drink in a cup from your store that is returnable. So it gets returned back through, basically a kiosk. It gets washed and then it can be reused a bunch of times. So heavy duty experimentation mode, all with the idea that we can reduce waste wherever possible, kind of behind the bar and in the actual experience itself.
Cool, thanks, Clay. I don't know if Stephan or Liz, you have comments there?
Yeah, I mean, for us, we're manufacturers of coffee equipment, and so our what we can kind of address from a sustainability perspective is a little bit different than what our customers can do. I mean, writ large, pour over kind of mitigates coffee waste, because you're making it to order. You're not making 3 gallons at a time and dumping it out every half hour, for quality issues. But and I don't want to greenwash what we're doing, but we do manufacture everything here in New York City in our facility at the Brooklyn Army Terminal. We do rely on a lot of air transport to get things, all over the world, but we also have worked very hard to keep our supply chains short. So we use local vendors for our machined aluminum and for, as many things as we can. And, we've kind of scaled our operation, our capacity to the demand, and keep an eye on keeping our supply chain short. And, and that's actually served us well during the pandemic, like with all this kind of supply chain, chaos that's happened, through hard work of my team here and a pre-existing kind of desire to keep our supply chain short and work with local vendors. We've been able to not shut down production throughout. And, I don't know if that's so much a byproduct of our sustainability or our higher aspirations, but it's meaningful to me personally, and and it certainly served us well to not be so dependent on things so far away from us. And anecdotally, we also compost our coffee grounds with worms in the office and feed our plants with it, but that's more hobby scale than industrial scale.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah,
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to mention, as a company, Oxo's made a commitment to 1% for the planet. So as a company, that's one of the goals that we're trying to head towards. Specifically for coffee, I think one of the things that we try to do is really focus on craft coffee and getting third wave coffee, because in general, those beans are grown in a way which is more sustainable than like your Robusta types of beans. So I think in general, we're trying to move to a place where people are going to spend the right amount of money for the coffee that's grown. And hopefully that means that those growers and producers are going to grow it in a more sustainable way. But yeah, that's sort of the goal.
Awesome, thank you. I think that actually segues super nicely into a combination of questions I think I'm going to ask us. There's one from Katie around how the pandemic's influenced how people buy packaged coffee. Is it from a shift to a coffee as a reward? Has that extended to how people purchase beans, different types of coffee, and so on? Ralph is asking about how people educate themselves for coffee, which I think speaks to where you talked about, is how do people get their first, how do you meet people at their level? How do you help educate them? And we just had a question come in from April about how coffee tastes are evolving as well. So I don't know, maybe like how can we, or how do you help people get into coffee? So I'll start with Liz, kind of with the OXO. You're saying meet people where they are, you evolve to be with them. Like Clay as well, is there a journey? You've talked about your journey. Are there journeys people go through? And Stephan, is there anything about the pour steady that maybe enables different beans, different extractions, and can take things to even a higher level? So start with Liz.
Yeah, it's a really good question. We do a lot of like user interviews. We used to do them in people's houses. Now we do them virtually. But one of the questions we always ask is like, tell me about the first time that you had a cup of coffee. And it is really so interesting to hear, the diverse cultural backgrounds. Like, especially if you're a family that comes from South America, you have coffee at home. Like your grandmother gave it to you when you were probably around 7. A lot of the stories are about like high school kids going to Starbucks after school, or people who, or like kids that are involved in sports, trying to like, get some performance edge and like looking to coffee to like fill that need. I think in general, that sort of journey has been really elucidating for us. Yeah, sorry, somebody at the door. Yeah, so I think in general, that's been really great for us. Sorry, I think that's all I want to say.
Cool. Maybe I'll go for Clay. Is Starbucks involved in kind of coffee education? I know one of your qualifications is coffee master. So how does that come about? I guess education internally and externally.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is kind of recognizing that coffee is different things to different people. So at Starbucks, like for me, like I said, pumpkin spice was coffee to me. Like that's what I expected out of a drink. But lots of people will prefer like an Americano with nothing in it, right? With no flavor. We try to meet everybody wherever they are and have a thing for them. So over time, as their tastes change, and they are changing, I would say that we've seen a lot of interest in lighter flavor, lighter sweetness. And we've kind of evolved to, I would say, the wellness bar, or what's perceived to be too indulgent, is getting lower, right? So we've kind of adapted our business to change and make some beverages that are better fits for people who are looking for something a little bit lighter. Whether that's something like a non-dairy option with oat milk or almond milk or something like that, just like super basic change of dairy in the drink, to literally introducing a brand new style of espresso, because we for decades would say that like dark coffee was coffee. But I think we took some learnings from, other shops around the country and around the world. They're saying like coffee can taste like more than just the roast. Coffee can taste like fruit. Coffee can taste like chocolate, caramel, whatever is kind of inherent to that bean. You don't want the roast necessarily to hide those flavors. So we have those options for people who are very much interested in that. And I'd say that that's probably a product of really like the last 5-10 years. It's really recent that we've seen that happen.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah, I could just hop in real briefly. Like, sorry, Charlie. We entered the market focusing on specialty coffee, which is like the segment that looks at lighter roasts and values variety, and wants one coffee to taste differently than another. And it's one of the reasons why pour over is popular in that world. Is like you're controlling how a black cup of brewed coffee is made, and then you're doing that in a way to kind of highlight the differences. And so we made this machine to enable that. There's like a interface for the settings for the barista to dial it in to make it their own. But what's happened in the pandemic is people went home, and this is also just me as a customer more than as a manufacturer, but there are these subscription services now like Trade and Coffee and Fellow Coffee just launched their own, where they are curated whole bean, shipped to you, every week or two, so that you have somebody giving you a boutique experience of like what local roasters and what the best roasters in the country are doing, so that you can experience that from the comfort of your own home. And I think there's a lot of like educational opportunity there.
Very cool, thanks. We've got a few questions here about futures and demographics. So I'll ask this one. So Michelle asked about, as people become more creative and take risks and experiment and go to social media, is that across all age groups? Are there peaks in certain ones? And then PA asks if we've noticed any regional cultural age differences or attitudes in rituals, and especially in the research. Were there any aha moments, anything you're like, oh wow, this person, this coffee, this type?
Yeah, I'll jump in on that one. I think, definitely younger generations are more experimental. At least this is what we see at Starbucks. And I think social media has a lot to do with that. But I think, the key that I've noticed is that there's so many people in that generation who are just desperate to get noticed. And it's really hard, like transparently, it's much harder now than it has been in the past because of access to information and the competition of against, like, let's say your own personal Instagram versus a brand's Instagram, and the algorithms and the way that they create exposure for people or don't create exposure for people. So I think that generation in particular is really looking for ways to stand out. And so they experiment, create things because it's an outlet to do that. And it's kind of a tool that they can use to stand out. And so if you have products or, experiences that can help with that, then those are the things that we've seen grow our business lately. Like the things that are more noticeable are the things that are getting purchased. And I think it's all kind of wrapped up in the idea that people want a way to stand out.
For Pour Steady, we're a small business and we manufacture these things in Brooklyn, but well more than half of our sales are international, and we have got partners and distributors in new market in different parts of the world over the course of the last 5-6 years. And what I've seen is our machines are easier to sell in some places than others. And in addition to having good partners, it also really has to do with the specific coffee culture there. And while specialty coffee is global and niche-y, it really differs globally in kind of wild ways. So like early on, we very quickly were able to sell machines in North Korea. Like there's kind of, or South Korea, sorry. But there's kind of like, there's crossover between coffee, specialty coffee cafes and like K-pop, pop culture there. So like we have a Pour Steady inside of the cafeteria at a record company there. That's like the coolest thing. But now last year we started selling more machines in the Middle East, specifically in Saudi Arabia. And I think it had to do with, this is my own theory, but I don't have a lot of access to what's going on there except a new partner who's able to like really represent us well. And the opportunity there, I think, started when they had men and women in coffee shops at the same time, which was a relatively new phenomenon. And that turned a lot of these coffee shops into social places where people could meet over coffee that, they were, separated before. And that created an opportunity for us there. And here in the United States and North America, it kind of follows almost like the micro brew movement with like locally roasted coffee, and smaller cities have these kind of micro brew coffee roastery sort of like hubs or like businesses where it's part of the community. There's art shows and local coffee and local beer, and and they're all wildly different, but each of those little pockets has grown and created opportunities for us to participate.
Great, thanks. I've got one more for this question really directed for Liz. We have a question here from, just forgotten the name, apologies, from Jennifer, who's actually designing a grinder right now. What's the role of the grinder in the experience? So you talked about like your favorite gadget was the pour over, but I've heard good things about grinders at home, that might be the essential one.
Yeah, I think if you're like really serious into coffee, you would probably get the advice that the grinder is the most important piece of equipment in the way that you brew coffee. I mean, there's so many aspects of coffee that are affecting the final result, like where the coffee was grown, how it was processed, how it was dried, how it was roasted, how you ground that coffee into the beans that you're going to use for your method of brewing, and then how you brew it and the ratio that you brew it. So there are a lot of parameters. But if you're interested, the grinder is the most important part because it's the thing that makes your repeated experiments consistent. So like analogy, if you're gonna make potatoes, mashed potatoes, and all of your potatoes are different sizes, and you cook it all for the same time, you're going to have like really, really mushy potatoes and potatoes that are raw. So same idea with coffee. Like if the coffee, ground coffee is the same size, evenly distributed, then when you apply that water and actually brew it, you get coffee that's evenly extracted for whatever brew method that you use. Now, maybe you mess that part up, like it's way too sour and under extracted, or you add too much coffee and it tastes really bitter, but at least it's not mixed together, right? Because when those things mix together, they really do not taste good. So that's why people really value the grinder, to a point where people will even grind coffee and then sift it afterwards to make sure that you don't have any errant pieces, and it's very, very specific. Especially, I know, like if you have a commercial coffee grinder, they actually have sieves in order to make sure that that coffee is exactly consistent. And I see Clay nodding because I assume that in that kind of process, you want to make sure that the product is the same no matter where you get a cup of coffee at Starbucks. Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you very much. Thanks for all the questions, and thanks to our panelists to answer them. I'm going to hand back to Julie now for our final questions and wrap up.
Thank you, Charlie. And thank you everyone for the great questions. So the next question, we really want to talk about how rituals are changing. And I feel like that's actually been a little bit of a subtext of this entire conversation, which I didn't quite expect. I think when you think of ritual, you think of something rigid and the same exact thing that you do every day. And instead, we're actually talking a lot about how habits change or how the ritual evolves. And so I'd love for a final bit, we've also talked a lot about how obviously everyone's habits have changed so much because of the pandemic and just so much upheaval. We'd really like your perspectives on what you think will stay versus what's going to kind of go back as we look forward to the future. Clay, do you want to get us started?
Yeah. I think I said this at the beginning, but like rituals are those things that a lot of people will just turn to in times of disruption or in times of major life change. I think like I told the story earlier about how I had to have a son now. So my ritual is now to go to Starbucks with him instead of just like on my own. But it's like we have adapted this to become a family ritual instead of an individual ritual. Well, I think what I expect to see happening in the future is that the craving for connection. I think this is what coffee is so good at. Coffee is a great connector of people. That craving for connection is going to be stronger than ever. Like we have seen our business change to be more about groups and a little bit less about individuals. So I don't think that's going to change. I think that going forward, people will find any reason possible to create a group occasion and to create a ritual that is more than just their own, so that they can find that connection. And I think that coffee is great at doing just that.
Yeah, I would echo the same. I think the things that will stay, you know, a lot of people when their office is closed, maybe they didn't even have a way to make coffee at home, or they found the coffee, you know, unpalatable. So they've gone into this journey of trying different ways to brew coffee. And I think that's probably going to stay. You know, maybe some people will now brew coffee at home and then take it to work in a travel mug, or maybe they'll start to look for ways to take that coffee with them or brew it at work. I think hopefully those things will stay. I think the thing that I hope the most that comes back is that social connection. You know, like going to get a cup of coffee is like the equivalent of just like, let's just go for a drive. We don't even know, we don't have necessarily even an end in mind. We just want to spend the time together. And this is sort of our excuse to be together. And that's the thing that I look forward to coming back as a ritual.
And I mean, I think the rituals around coffee that have changed, you know, I think there's definitely been an acceleration during the pandemic, like so many things. But, you know, when I moved to New York when I was 17, a regular cup of coffee was like 4 or 5 scoops of sugar and half a cup of milk with like some really, you know, bad commodity Robusto dumped in there. And I thought that was good, you know, I thought that was great. And eventually, you know, I experienced a latte art, like bespoke cup of coffee at a kind of a Pacific Northwest branded cafe in Williamsburg. And I was like, oh my God, this is my new ritual. And eventually, you know, I ended up here at Forsteady, where we've been part of this conversation. And I think what I mentioned before a little bit is like, you know, people spend a lot of time becoming better educated coffee consumers, you know, where there are now these opportunities to have curated delivery of like freshly roasted coffee from all over the country and bringing that from your home back into the world. I just hope that, you know, people continue to evolve their rituals to be, you know, to have experience better and better coffee. I think there's an opportunity now for that. I was told my internet connection is unstable, so I hope that wasn't too choppy on that. But.
No, that was great. Even if Zoom was a little rude to you while you were talking. No, I think that was wonderful. And I just want to thank everybody for all of your time today. If you want to revisit the discussion or share it with others, we will be posting the recording on our website, along with a summary in about a week. I'd like to say join us next week, or next week. Join us for our next virtual Smart Salon, which will be on Tuesday, February 15th at 5 p.m. on mobility and well-being. There's a link there to RSVP or read more about it on the screen, as well as Jared just shared a link in the chat if you're interested and want to sign up for early access and any updates. Thanks again to Liz, Clay, and Stephan. Really loved the conversation that we've had as we've been preparing for this and today, and really just gonna feel like change and think so much more tomorrow morning when I get up and have a cup of coffee. So thank you all for joining us, and I hope to see you next time. Have a good night.